Hey, my name's Gerwin.
And my name is Sean. This is the Sikh Meets World podcast, where we have conversations with powerful Sikhs who took on the world around them.
We are also the leaders of the National Sikh Campaign, the organization that started the award-winning We Are Sikhs initiative, which aim to help the broader American public understand our values and contributions to the United States. And over the years, while we're developing the campaign, we had an opportunity to meet and have in-depth conversations with so many amazing Sikhs. And we often thought, man, like if other people could listen in on these conversations and gain some of these insights, it would be super beneficial. We believe this podcast is an opportunity to finally do just that. We hope that when you listen to these conversations, that you will be inspired and become engaged in your community and ultimately in public service.
Exactly. In fact, the National Sikh Campaign and ultimately Sikh Meets World were in response to the shooting in Oak Creek, Wisconsin in 2012. That tragic event showed that the troubles of our community and lack of knowledge of Sikhism generally continued to persist far after 9/11. So, for our first episode, we chat with fellow activists who were also motivated to action after Oak Creek, Pardeep Singh Kaleka and Arno Michaelis. Pradeep's father, Satwant Singh, was the president of the Oak Creek Gurdwara and heroically died while trying to stop the shooter. And Arno, he's a former white supremacist who actually started the same white power group that the Oak Creek shooter was a part of. After Oak Creek, they forged an unlikely friendship that they detail in their new book, The Gift of Our Wounds. In this episode, Gerwin got to join them along their book tour in New York City to discuss how their paths crossed. Please take a listen to the first episode of Sikh Meets World.
I was reading the book. I was on the plane. It was just so freaking good.
Thanks, man.
Yeah. My eyes would well up at moments. When I would listen to Pardeep's story, this serene kind of like humming life. I mean, there's obviously ups and downs, but it's very serene in the sense that there was a lot of clarity of like where you needed to go and achieving that and the struggles of that, and I could relate to it a lot. Then you would have this hard break, and it would go to Arno, and it was just chaotic and it was messy, and I would cringe. I could relate to it if I took certain elements of my personality and just brought them to the most extreme expressions of that.
Yeah.
And surprisingly, I understood it. I could not see myself doing those things.
Right.
But again, I could see the most extremes expression of myself in a certain realm going to that place.
Right on.
But anyway, let's actually talk about like why we're here. So you guys have an epic friendship. Do you want to tell folks how it got started?
And I wanted to actually comment on a lot of that stuff, but we'll come back to that in a little bit.
Yeah.
Our friendship got started shortly after the shootings at the Sikh Temple of Wisconsin in Oak Creek on August 5th, 2012, when 6 people lost their lives. One of those people being my father, Sikh Temple President Satwant Singh Kaleka, at the hands of a white supremacist gunman. And about a couple months later, reached out to Arno just to ask him, and I knew that he was doing this work already, so just to ask him, like, what was the motivation behind it? I mean, like you said, Gurun, it's tough to, like, you even said, like, you can understand it. And a lot of times we don't get into that, like, we judge before we understand. So I didn't want to be at fault of doing that. So that was my inspiration of reaching out to Arno. And from there, just a beautiful friendship. We both kind of went there for our own purposes, but I feel like sometimes what you want and what you get are two different things. Yep. And what we got out of that was a beautiful friendship.
Yep.
For me, August 5th, 2012, like, brought a new urgency to the work I was doing. I came public with my story in 2010, and the intention was really to make the world a place that's less conducive to hate and violence, to help guide people away from the mistakes that I made, to help people of all backgrounds find healthy ways to resolve conflicts rather than violence. And I've been doing that work with a zeal for a couple of years, but it wasn't until the August 5th shooting that, like, I think the real urgency of it became apparent. Like, this is a guy who came from the gang that I had helped to start. I had literally, like, set the stage for this guy. And so I felt a lot of responsibility that I had to respond. I had to be part of the defiance of hate and violence in response to this atrocity that happened. So I was really honored to that Par reached out to me, and I was really excited when I first heard from him, and happy to help any way I could, and really just offering that help and being there was what was most important. But I was pretty freaked out also.
Really?
Yeah, like I was intimidated at the prospect by meeting him because I just felt like there was nothing I could say that would be sufficient.
Right.
Like, just coming in there like, hey, I'm Arno. Sorry about your dad. Like, it just sounded utterly hollow and not enough. Like, I'm a pretty wordy dude. Like, it's probably apparent already.
Yeah.
And I'm the same way when I write. So,
Yeah.
like, I'm very verbose.
Mm-hmm.
And being at a loss for words is an odd situation for me. And so I was at a loss as to what to say to Pardeep when I met him.
I wanted you to touch on your dad a little bit, because there's so many moments where you wrote about your dad that made my eyes welled up, because it was like, it reminded me of what my family had to go through. Yeah. And he embodied what it meant to be a Sikh up until the literal moment that he passed away.
Yeah.
Like that, there was no more. I don't want to say the Sikh way to pass away, but more like the way you think of what a Sikh is supposed to do.
Yeah.
Right.
No, I think about
like up until the moment he died.
Yeah, I'll share. So, like, even though we're doing our best to put on a brave face for the world, because that's our responsibility, our obligation. And I remember just the day of the funeral comes up, and we go and we're putting Dad's body away, and I decide that I'm gonna walk home. And people are like, they're kind of concerned because they're like, well, I don't know where he is. And I just asked them, and my wife was, amazing in this, because she always has her trust in me. And she just, tells me, like, if he wants to walk home, let him walk home. And so I walked home, kind of cleared my head, just got through a lot of just processing. And once I got home, that's exactly what a lot of family told me, that there's no better way to die than to be inside the place that you helped build, that you were president of for the past 15 years, with, a knife in your hand against a gunman trying to protect your place. And it really symbolizes and brings back, and I'm not comparing him to, I'm not comparing it to the Golden Temple or an Amritsar, and I'm not comparing that to, Pardeep Singh and things like that. But in the spirit of defying hate, Pardeep Singh held, the story is he held his head in one hand and his sword in the other, and fought off invaders. Mm-hmm. And I think in that spirit that there's no better way for a Sikh to be martyred. Mm-hmm. And his life was the same sacrifice that he gave that same day. It was, this is for Sikh and immigrants who come over, and they sacrifice so much so that we can lead a better life. He was just that way, and it was honestly, it was my honor to put him in the book, and him have such a big part of that book. Sikhi, we feel like the spiritual belief of Sikhi comes in when we see like this spirit that is within everybody, and once we leave this earth, we leave this body, this soul leaves us and returns back and merges to wherever it merges to. Mm-hmm. And, through the past 5.5, 6 years after this, I believe that those spirits, all of those spirits that we have lost, have been guiding us to do what we had to do, and things would, I wouldn't worry about things going right or going wrong. I just know they had to go the way that they were going to go.
Mm-hmm.
So this book was, a testament to all those spirits.
Yeah. The other thing, I guess the other question I wanted to ask is, you were actually an immigrant here.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was born here, and it's a very different experience.
Yeah.
What was that like?
So
how has the U.S. changed from when you moved here to now?
We came in 1982, and during that time, we moved from Patiala, Punjab. Punjab, was having its share of problems, like instituted curfews and things like that, and it's documented in the book. And this was before Operation Blue Star happened, and then the Sikh Hindu riots of that time. So we definitely, once we came here, we felt the sense of, I know Dad felt the sense of guilt of not being back in his homeland, but he also felt the sense of relief, right? And that's a funny feeling, because I think even after the shooting happened and I was safe, I felt the sense of guilt and I felt the sense of relief. Like, thank God I'm not dead, but oh my God, I got to do something about it. When we came to America, it was Milwaukee, Wisconsin was just completely different. It was very much a manufacturing, blue collar, beer town. There wasn't a lot of opportunities for immigrants to get jobs, so you really had to look after one another. So the first job that Dad got was working at a gas station for a friend of his. And then the first job that Mom got was working at a knitting plant in downtown Milwaukee. And those jobs at that time paid, I think, like $1.50 an hour. And really just owning gas stations at that time was not really a profitable or lucrative career that anybody wanted to do. But he stuck in there and eventually just was able to buy his first gas station and fix it up. It was an old mechanic garage and in a traditionally South Side neighborhood that had also gone through demographic change and becoming much more going from a Polish neighborhood to becoming a Latino neighborhood. And we weren't Latino, we weren't Polish. One of the weird things is, like, when I was growing up, I was never really anything to be anything enough. Like, I was never white enough to be white. I was never black enough to be black. I was never Latino enough to be Latino. I was never really and there wasn't enough Sikhs around to be that either.
Yep.
So it was like the first time that I really started to hang out with Sikhs and Indians was in college.
Right.
Yeah. So,
same.
Yeah. So it was just a really different world than the one that we have now.
You had like multiple faces.
Whoa, yeah. multiple.
Yeah. I can definitely identify that. But I want to get to Arno, because that, I think a lot of people are going to get a lot of, as much as people will identify with Pradeep when they read the book, I think people will just be endlessly curious about Arno, because you grew up, you actually had a fairly decent childhood.
Oh,
yeah. It wasn't obviously perfect, but it was solid.
Yeah.
But how did you? Can you describe how you got onto the path of becoming a white supremacist?
We do a lot of workshops, training, and one of them that's basically an exercise in compassion, exploring compassion, understanding it, cultivating it. The theme is hurt people hurt people.
Yes.
The essence of where violence comes from. And in my case, in my childhood was idyllic. In many, many ways. There are literally billions of children on the face of this earth who would have happily traded childhoods with me. It would have been like winning the lottery for them to trade childhoods with me. A lot of it, I think, has to do with my personality type. I don't know. Pardeep probably has many diagnoses for me, but like from day one, I was like this weird, wild, different kid. I was an adrenaline junkie. Like, I needed to have insane, like, out of the box stimulation going on just to keep me interested in anything.
Right.
And that it wasn't for lack of trying that wasn't guided in a good way. My mom is an absolutely brilliant artist, and I was drawing things from day one, and I've always been really involved in one kind of pursuit or the arts or another. Unfortunately, that didn't guide me in a good direction, really. It was just kind of taken for granted, along with all the other things I took for granted.
Yeah.
I had a lot of adults in my life who really cared about me. Every teacher I ever had was just like, he's so bright. He's such a wonderful kid. Like, but then they're asking, why is he doing this? Why does he act like this? I grew up in an alcoholic household. My dad's drinking put a lot of pressure on my mom, and they fought a lot. It was never physical violence. It was never even like really heated arguments. It was just my mom being stressed to her absolute breaking point constantly.
Right.
And my dad's an amazing person. He loved us deeply, and we knew that every single day. But that distance that alcoholism creates between the alcoholic and the rest of their people in their life that hurt me. That hurt my mom. And looking back, I think it was my suffering growing up in that environment which drove me to start lashing out at other kids.
Yeah.
And I started getting a thrill from not only lashing out at other kids, but mostly from the response I got from all these adults.
Right.
And another kind of like way to distill it is that my entire life, I've been told how wonderful I am and how gifted I am. And because I was suffering, I was like, I'm not wonderful.
Right.
I'm horrible. If you don't believe me, watch what I'm going to do to this kid. And then I would bully kids, and they would still say, no, you're still wonderful. And I'd be like, okay, you don't believe me still.
Right.
I'm going to have to like turn up the horrible a little bit until you do believe me.
Right.
And I don't know, what I was hoping to accomplish. I'm not saying like there's any kind of end point, but this is just basically, it's what suffering does. It distances you. We as human beings have a tendency, we're animals like other animals. And when an animal is hurt, a cat or a dog, they have a tendency to go like isolate themselves, crawl off in a corner under a porch somewhere. And human beings do that also. Yeah. And so my way of isolating myself was just to disengage from my parents, both my parents, who really, for all their struggles, they really tried to keep me on a good track. They put everything they had into giving me a good life and keeping me heading in a good direction, as did all these teachers, as did all these relatives. Yep. And it still it just snowballed as I grew older. My antisocial behavior just kept amplifying to the point where I started drinking when I was 14. First time I drank till I passed out.
Do you think it amplified because of you were addicted to the emotion of just reveling in the chaos of your anger?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. That was my addiction for sure. And I felt a sense of power from it.
Right.
And it wasn't because, it's important to say, it wasn't because I didn't feel powerful as it was. Like, I had the world like fawning over me about what a golden boy I was. And that's certainly a sense of power.
Right.
Like in society, I was born into a position of power, but I didn't see it that way. I saw power as people being afraid of me. Or like people like respecting me because other people were afraid of me. Like it was that kind of false respect that's rooted in fear. Right. And so started drinking when I was 14. I was super into punk rock, which I still love. I don't think punk itself was like the problem, but for me it was just a vehicle to lash out at the world, to break stuff, to make people angry. And when I was 16 is when I was introduced to white power skinhead music, and that to me was just like the ultimate means of repulsing people. It was the ultimate way to make people angry, and it was the ultimate way to say I'm horrible.
Right. Right. It almost feels like it was like if you take the idea of like when you're arguing with somebody and you come back and you're like, and another thing. You know what I mean?
Right, yeah,
but that to be the most extreme expression of that.
Totally.
But
yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Like your whole life was revolved around going, and another thing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Absolutely.
That's when I first heard you say that, like that's how I understood.
Yeah.
I was like, it is actually not, it may not even really, the philosophy of white supremacy is almost not even what drove you. It was this addiction to this chaos And that was just an outlet that you hung your hat on to achieve that chaos. Is that accurate?
Yeah, you nailed it. That's exactly what it was. Had nice one, Gerwin. Had I seen some other vehicle to repulse people that was more effective than a swastika, I would have been all over it.
Right.
I just and some kids do find other vehicles that they feel like, hey, I'm a rebel.
Right.
I'm rebelling against societies. And nowadays the alt-right is full. The Tea Party was all like that, as are these same elements on the left.
Right.
Like, I'm resisting, I'm resisting this, I'm fighting against this. And it's, I think all kids especially, and all human beings do to a degree, but especially when you're a teenager, you want to make a difference. You want to change things. You want to make an impact.
Yep. And
what drives people into any flavor of violent extremism is a lack of identity, purpose, and belonging.
Yeah.
Just about every violent extremist you talk to, you go, why are you doing this? They're going to say, because this is happening and this is bad. It needs to change. I need to stop this bad thing from happening.
Yep.
So it is like this twisted kind of sense of altruism. But honestly, to me, like that again, that was arbitrary. That was part of my vehicle to make people angry, was that I'm saving the white race. I'm fighting against the genocide against the white race.
Yep.
And like, yeah, that's all well and good for the whole neo-Nazi narrative. But for me, if that didn't anger people, I wouldn't have been interested in it.
Right. And that's totally how it felt when I read the book. And then I want to take it to Pradeep, because it almost similar in your life at that point. You were trying to find purpose in being a police officer. What was it like trying to serve and then not being able to have the opportunity to do that?
Yeah, no, it was you hit it right on the head. It's just oftentimes, and I went to a great university, did well, and then applied to multiple police departments, and really just not getting those callbacks made me kind of think, damn, like, what else do I got to do to be like even have a shot,
right,
to be on this police department,
right?
It just got passed up by just numerous police departments, and I remember going and taking the test and thinking to myself, wow, this is like the written test. Like,
right.
This is easy.
Yeah.
I left in like 20 minutes because I'm like, this is so easy.
Yep.
And then not getting a call back and being like, wow, it was so easy. I know I did well on it.
Right.
And still not getting a call back. And I got a 4-year degree when it's only required to have like a high school degree at the time.
Yep.
Or a 2-year degree.
Yep.
And
so
they're like,
you knew you could. It was clear you could do the work.
Yeah. So it took work just to not even be disgruntled at that. Mm-hmm. Eventually, was thankful that Milwaukee came calling, and went through the process. It was a long process. Became a police officer, went to the academy for 9 months, then finally out to the streets, and then really just I'm from Milwaukee, but where I was policing was the inner city of Milwaukee, and really just 99% of my arrests were violent crimes, domestics, guns, drugs, just getting used to that culture of policing, and so there's a couple different, we're wearing masks, right? Mm-hmm. So you're wearing a mask when you get to the job. Yep. Then you take that mask off, and we call it, well, it might not be exactly a mask, but it might be a bulletproof vest, right? And it might be a gun, and it might be a badge, and it might be all those things that you carry on yourself to like, hey, you know what? I'm gonna be secure when I go out there. Mm-hmm. And hopefully, like, when you get home, you can take that off. And I just really knew it was time for me to stop policing when I was getting angry. Just breathe. Me and Preeti, we were married, and we had Amherst was on the way. Mm-hmm. And Preeti would ask me, how was work? Mm-hmm. And then she would ask me like every once in a while, how's work? And I never really answered, but then one time I answered and said, listen, if I got to explain to you how work was, then I got to relive it, and then I got to go through it twice. So why would I want to do that? Right. And then once you can't even talk about what you're doing, it's probably time to change careers.
Right. I want to go back to Arno. So you touched on a lot of things about how you became a white supremacist, why you got swept into that ideology. Like, I have a couple of questions just out of curiosity, and then I have like some more serious ones. Sure. Like, how did you deal with that level of chaos? Because there's like some things that you did when I was reading the book that I just like cringed. Like the stuff when you were like in your parents' home when you found out they were away, and like, or when you saw the gay gentleman. There's a gay gentleman that you had punched. Right. Like, how did you? Like, I was just like, oh my God, the humanity is just like, just had escaped.
Yeah.
How did you get to that place? Because I guess that's a different level.
It was really just a matter of like being in constant flight of what just happened. Like whatever just happened 5 minutes ago, I gotta get away from it. I can't sit here literally and figuratively. I can't be here when everything comes shaken down, when the consequences of this arrive.
Right.
And I'd say that whether it was a crime I was committing and the consequences were the police coming, or, and really most powerfully, I can't escape my own inner consequences. Like throughout me, throughout that process, there's a human being inside of me who's going, what are you doing?
Right.
What is wrong with you? Like, this is horrible. You shouldn't be doing this.
Right.
And so I'm constantly trying to flee that voice. So the way I managed the chaos was to be constantly in motion, whether it was physically, emotionally, intellectually. No, I wasn't in an intellectual motion, that's for sure. But spiritually, I wasn't even thinking on those levels. I'm just trying to flee the intellectual and spiritual consequences of what I'm doing. And I'm always really tentative to even mention alcohol, because I never ever want to make it sound like I was just drunk. Like it's never an excuse. The alcoholism was, there's plenty of alcoholics on earth. Plenty of alcoholics on earth. Like, fortunately, not many of them attack people because of the color of their skin.
Right.
But the alcohol was certainly a factor. That was part of my way of fleeing. I was constantly like numbing this inner voice that was saying, this is bad. So I'm like, oh, well, if I drink enough beer, then I'm not going to hear that voice anymore.
I was wondering because there's that voice that people have when
absolutely.
When they do something bad and they know they're doing something bad and there's a consequence coming and they eventually have to deal with their inner voice and the consequence together.
Yep.
And I was wondering, if I put myself in your shoes, I was like, how could I live with just myself, just forget the consequences.
Right.
If I was doing this, because I know this voice would be there just ripping me apart.
Right.
And so it was alcoholism that allowed you to numb that.
The alcohol is a huge, huge part of it. That was my go-to. That was every day. It was basically like, how am I going to get beer? Where's the beer coming from? How much can I drink? And then how do I balance that with work, which is how I get more beer? Like that was really one of the biggest front and center concerns of mine. But another means of fleeing was delving into the ideology of white supremacy. I.e., there's a chapter in the book where I travel down south, and there's actually like a holiday in white supremacist circles called Martyrs Day, which is the day that a guy named Robert Matthews was killed by federal agents on Whidbey Island in Seattle.
Yeah, that guy died an insane death.
It was hardcore. Like it was him versus like about 100 federal agents who were all heavily. It was out of a movie, like straight up out of a movie.
And this dude, when he died, was burnt to a crisp, holding his rifle.
Exactly.
Like that is committed.
Oh, it is. And that's real. That really happened.
Right.
Now, for me, in the way that would be a means of flight for me, is I would think of Robert Matthews and the sacrifice that he made, dying with his hands on his weapon and never giving up. Like, so in my head, I'm thinking like, I gotta be like this guy. But I knew damn well that I didn't really want to get in a firefight with federal agents, and I didn't want to. I didn't have the guts to take it that far. I don't know if guts is the right word, but Robert Matthews was certainly a different type of white supremacist than me. Robert Matthews didn't drink. He was like 100%
ideology,
mental clarity all the time, and he was so engulfed in the lies of white supremacy, he believed them to be true, and he was as hardcore as you get. But like going to a ceremony where we're swearing allegiance to the fight that he kicked off, and all these like, and at that ceremony I was relatively sober. Yeah. So it was the ideology combined with the alcohol, combined with the white power music, the fighting, the violence. That was all means of flight to not like sit and just dwell in what was happening and what I was doing and why I was doing it. I never wanted to answer any of those questions.
Yeah. How did you get out of it?
Exhaustion is the simple answer.
It wasn't even actually what you like. We got going back to what we said earlier. It wasn't even what you really. The ideology wasn't really what was motivating you.
Everywhere you looked, blew holes in the ideology. Like everything, especially the biggest driver of the exhaustion is when people who I claim to hate treated me with kindness. Yeah. And so the ideology says that there's this Jewish conspiracy to wipe the white race off the face of the earth. It's been going on for thousands of years. And as their greatest weapon against us are people of color. So black people, Latino people, Indian people, whoever. Anybody who's not white, they're here because of the Jews bringing them here. Mm-hmm. Like that, this is all like white power ideology 101. And when I had a Jewish boss who said I was a good kid just going through a phase rather than fire me for having a swastika on my jacket, that blew holes in this whole thing about how Jews are these horrible people. Like this guy is a human being, and he's a very honorable one to the point where he's like, yeah, whatever. I know. Go ahead. Yeah, you white power, Sikh, yeah. Just, you'll grow out of it. And this is someone who has family members who perished in the Holocaust. Like, this is someone who had every reason to hate me and to fire me with a vengeance. And he didn't take that path. He took the path of humanity and demonstrated for me how human beings should treat each other. Yes. And that knowledge of that experience was just like this, it just added to the, if you picture like you're walking, actually, part of what used to do this, sometimes when we do talks, we'd bring a kid up to the front of the audience, and we'd put like a jug of water in their hand that was maybe full about like this. Yeah. And Par would like slowly pour water in the jug, making it heavier and heavier while talking to the audience. Yeah. And as it gets heavy, you see this kid like, it's hard to keep it holding it up. And, and they get to a point where they're breaking. Yep. They can't hold it up anymore. Yep. And again, the reason of this exercise is to get the audience to be like, hey, why are you making him do that? Don't do that. Like, it's getting heavy. Can't you see he's struggling? Yep. For me, it was like I'm carrying around these jugs that are getting more and more full of water and weight. Right. And every time somebody treats me with kindness, that's like a huge addition to the weight that I'm carrying. Right. Till it gets to the point where I'm like, I can't carry the weight anymore. I just have to shed it. Yes. And so that's what brought me to the point I was looking for an excuse to leave after being in for 7 years. The excuse came in a 2-stage process. I became a single parent when my daughter was 18 months old.
What is your opinion on the state of the white power movement today? Because when Oak Creek happened, when I heard a white supremacist did that, I was like, what the hell? Like,
right.
Like, how many of these people are still around?
Right.
Yeah, I know they're around, but like, let's be real, like, how many of these people are still around?
Right.
But now it's shifted. So if you're like in high school or college listening to this, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, it's not common to hear about these people, but now they're in the news again. So what, in your raw opinion, how do you theorize the emergence of these groups? And a question for both of you guys from your experience, what's the best way to meet that level of hatred and that, level of extremism?
What's happening now is the rhetoric coming from the White House is like dead on rhetoric that we used to use in the day. Close the borders. Immigrants are bad. They're rapists.
Yep.
They're terrorists.
Yep.
We don't want them in our country. We're going to kick them out. All of that rhetoric is like white power 101. That's people on the right will say, well, that's guilt by association to associate the Klan with Donald Trump. But when your talking points are exactly the same,
right?
That it's a fact. You can't deny that all that comes from. This is a guy who wanted to have and I don't know if this actually took off, but he was going to have like a weekly thing highlighting immigrant crime against some innocent American. It's just that it's. You never want to go there to like, oh, Hitler. Okay, conversation's over.
Right.
But looking at what happened in Nazi Germany and having studied the Holocaust to a fair degree myself, like you see all these parallels happening.
Right.
The xenophobia, the us versus them.
Yes.
We're Americans.
They're not Americans.
Exactly.
Yes.
It's a very ripe environment for white supremacist groups. They feel sanctioned. They feel validated by the highest office in the land.
Yep. At
the same time, there's pretty critical differences going on that I wouldn't have been cool with back in the day, and I think a lot of white supremacists aren't. They just try to gloss over. But that being, if you're a person of color, if you're anybody in a marginalized group, but you want to come in there and wear a "Make America Great Again" hat, and you want to condemn Mexicans and Muslims and say that Black Lives Matter are terrorists, which there are black people who do that. There's Muslim people who do it.
Right.
I wouldn't be surprised if there's Sikhs who do it.
Oh, there is. There is.
And the thing is, those people are not only accepted,
right,
they are celebrated.
Yes.
Now they can be like, look, how can I be racist?
Right.
I think Sheriff Clark is a great man. Look at the big black guy in the cowboy hat who doesn't like gay people.
Right.
That's because diversity is so inevitable. Even people who are anti-diversity are becoming diverse in their camps because there's no getting around it.
Right.
Now that being said, like while they may be gleeful to be pointing at the Muslims for Trump, they'll still go right ahead with all their anti-Muslim laws and rhetoric.
Yes.
Like for your average Muslim who's not knuckling under and being like, hey, this is great, make America great again. They're not going to be accepted by any stretch by these people who claim to be celebrating them.
Yes.
I think so. When we think about 2012, you're exactly right. That was one of the deadliest deadliest shootings committed by an affiliated white supremacist. And sadly, there's been repeat things after that. We've I don't know about affiliated, but I think it's becoming more and more normalized. And the normalization happens in, Charlottesville. Those aren't, those aren't white power skinheads, like Arno was. They're not walking around with swastikas on themselves, and they're not walking around with Doc Martens and bald heads. They're walking around with polo shirts and khakis.
Yep.
And tiki torches.
Yeah.
and just basically letting you know that this can be your neighbor.
Yeah.
This could be anybody.
Yes.
Right?
I think that's what enraged me more than anything else. It
exactly.
was
you can get
the commonality of it.
Yeah, you can get this tiki torch from Walmart and have it at your barbecue, and then you can march after that.
Yeah.
And that just sense of normalcy, is scary to people.
Right.
It's really important to understand, though, I'm a big Sun Tzu fan, and in The Art of War, he says, if you know yourself and your enemy, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know one or the other, you'll win half of them, If you don't know either, you won't win a single battle.
Right.
And so understanding the intention of any violent extremist groups, which are all the same, is first of all to speak for the entirety of that group. So the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, they announced themselves, they're speaking for all white people.
Right.
They want to do that.
Right.
So if we let them do that by saying, oh, well, that's what all white people think,
right.
we are now, we're literally putty in their hands.
Right.
The other thing that they want to do is they want you to think that they're hiding around every corner and they're lurking under every rock and that every white guy you see is one of them.
Right.
That's their objective as well. And unfortunately, because of the emotions involved and the trauma involved, people are falling into
that. Yes.
Yeah, they're
see
falling
that quite
into
a
their
bit,
hands.
yeah.
So it's something we need to be really cognizant of, that when we're opposing these groups, that we're not accomplishing their objective.
I very much agree with that. I was listening to a talk by Van Jones put on at a conference by Valerie Kaur. And Van Jones, I think, I just fundamentally agreed with a lot of what he said.
Yeah, he's a great guy.
Yeah, he said, you do not want to become what you're fighting.
Mm.
And he gave a cautionary tale to us, the left, progressives, to not go down that road.
Right.
Because you're not going to out-nasty the nastiest people.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
You're not going to win on those terms.
Right.
And like you have to go a different way. And you should go a different way based off what you're actually fighting for.
Right.
And I just agreed. I just fundamentally agreed with that.
Yeah.
And I've seen the results of that from the campaign.
Right.
I'll give you just a little story from like on when we started the campaign, we had to do a lot of testing, like what messages were going to work, and we got a whole bunch of people together. Valerie was actually one of them, and then we decided what these were the things we were going to test, and then we're going to go do some focus groups. And we were doing a focus group, and there was a woman sitting in the back, very old woman. This is when the Tea Party was super big, and she was just we didn't tell them any information about Six. We just showed them pictures, and I was like very excited to see this because like when people will meet me, they'll put on a different face than what they're thinking in some cases, right? I mean, not all the time, but in some cases. And I in this focus group, I could see the people inside, but they could not see me. So I was like really like, oh, I've been waiting. I want to know. Right. So, and they asked this woman first, and she just had the most viscerally like racist reaction and most negative reaction. She's like, "There's no way that these people are repugnant. They're against my values. There's no way I would have anyone around me." And I was like, okay, well, it's what I expected, but this is another extreme. Like, okay, we're not going to change this person. Right. Then just gave them some information. Sikhs believe in equality. They stand for women's rights. They stand for religious tolerance. They'll stand for anybody.
Right.
And then he like kind of like looked at her face like as she read the scripts and like started like you could tell she was thinking something was happening in her head. And then by the end, the moderator went around and asked questions like, so what are your thoughts after you've received this information? And this woman like looked around the room. She's like, these people are great. And I was like, how do I convert? And I was like, well, that's not the purpose of the exercise is to convert you. But I was like, that was nuts. Like this happened in an hour. Right? She went from, I absolutely do not want them to be my neighbors to, I want to be them. Do you know what I mean? And that's when I was like, you can't write anybody off.
Right.
You can't write anybody off because you don't even know the power of what you're even preaching if you do that.
Exactly.
And I saw in that moment, I saw it and I was like, whatever, if we get the money to do this, it will work. And if other people do this, and I started a whole other initiative based off that interaction called Know Your Neighbor, if other people do that, their own faith, other minority communities do that in their own faith, meet intolerance with humanity,
yep,
with empathy, with almost an understanding of like you're feeling this way, and I feel sorry for you, but not telling them that, but like having that empathy, and the being able to man up and like, here, this is what I believe. I don't know. That's what I learned, and I feel like I don't know how that would relate to someone who's.
So I feel that's absolutely dead on.
And that's what we've been doing for the last 5.5 years, and that's everything. The book speaks to that. And really just as we started off, we started talking about the immigrant experience and the American experience and all these experiences, and really starting with a sense of gratitude, and this gratitude really being that middle, right? Because it's like we can give the left too much energy, and we can give the right too much energy. But if we keep speaking to the middle and allowing those values to just walk out in front of us, they'll just that works right there.
And I want to pause right there because it's, when you say the middle, I think that's absolutely right. But I want to make a distinction, and what only furthers your point. It's not the middle ground just to find middle ground to compromise. Yeah. It's to find the common ground.
Exactly. Yeah, big difference.
It's a big difference
because
you're still firmly in your position, but you don't. You may phrase something a little bit different, or you may approach something a little bit different to reach the common ground, or you might point something out to reach the common ground to build off a relationship that might seem very unlikely.
Yeah. We have a friend who we met yesterday, and she calls it cure fronting.
Yep.
And sometimes it's cure fronting and like finding a solution.
Right.
Care fronting.
Care fronting. Sorry.
Instead of confronting.
Yeah.
Care fronting.
Got it. Got it.
I like cure fronting.
Cure works also. Yeah.
Actually, you can take that one. That's yours. I stole that last time about common ground, middle ground from Van Jones. So.
Right. That's an amazing exercise, and I think we've been to a couple of talks where people have also said, how can I convert to Sikhism?
And it's funny for the people that are non-Sikhs listening to this because we don't try to convert people. As a practice. It's not part of the thing,
I've also done church talks where they're like, the first question out of their mouth was, why are you trying to convert me?
Talking about just like how to the term resist, like everybody's like resist, we're the resistance,
right?
Everybody's and I'm a big like Star Wars nut.
I'm same.
Yeah, I'm a big film, TV, music geek. In Star Wars, it's there's the resistance. It used to be the rebellion, and it used to be the Empire. Now it's the First Order,
right?
But if you talk to either political pole, their story, they are the resistance,
right? And
the opposite side is the First Order,
right?
And they both see each other in the complete opposite roles.
Yes.
And what happens is when you play that game, you're letting your opponent make the terms of engagement.
Yes.
So we were talking about MMA fight that happened last night.
Yep.
I'm a huge MMA fan. I'm way too fragile to actually do it nowadays because of all the stupid things I did. But I often ask people to prove this point. I'm saying, so if I'm still a big gnarly looking dude and people are afraid of me. So I'd say if you and I were going to go into the octagon and fight, would you rather make the rules? Or would you want me to make the rules?
I'd rather make the rules.
Right, exactly. Would that be an advantage?
Yep.
Right. So if
that's what Floyd Mayweather did. It turned out well.
There you go.
It turned out well.
Perfect
for
example.
Floyd.
Perfect example. When we meet hate with hate, when we meet aggression with aggression, we're allowing our opponents to make the rules of engagement, which is not a recipe for success ever.
Right.
So when I go out and I'm a proponent of forgiveness and kindness and compassion. When Parr talks about those things, we are doing the exact opposite of knuckling under.
Right.
We are resisting in the most effective way.
That was the genius of the civil rights movement.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. I've been massively inspired by that, and looking back at like the Woolworth lunch counter protests.
Right.
You see these photos of these protesters who are defying the status quo in so many ways. They're sitting at a lunch counter, completely still. They're covered with ketchup and mustard and salt and sugar and pepper and blood. And there's crowds of people heckling them and attacking them, and they're just sitting there.
Right.
That's why those photos 100 years from now and 1,000 years from now are still going to have meaning.
Yeah.
But if those people would have got up and thrown a punch, as I would have been want to do, that's what that would have been the first thing I would have. Damn, I want to attack somebody who's attacking me. and you took a photo of that, it'd just be a big melee.
Right. And it wouldn't have the same.
It would just go in the pile of all the other photos of melees, and it wouldn't have any meaning at all.
And the power and the difficulty of achieving that, the power of that, is that you can't give in to your emotions at that moment.
Yeah, exactly.
And you have to trust almost that people will see that humanity in you.
Absolutely.
And that can be difficult when it feels like someone, while you're protesting, does not see that humanity.
Well, the one follow up to that is that you hear people nowadays saying like that's not fair. That we shouldn't have to bear that burden. Right. It's not fair that we have to do that. I agree 100%. It's not fair. But it goes down to, do you want to win or not?
Yes, I 100% agree with you.
Again, if you're talking about going back to a sports analogies, like for teams that are successful in sports, who win sports championships, Stanley Cup, Super Bowl, whatever, like you guys have to go above and beyond, far above and beyond what is the baseline in order to win. And that's what it boils down to.
I agree with that.
Yeah, and I think even for like, that's kind of, so thinking about that and saying it's not fair for the oppressed to have to speak to that, I think that's kind of almost a Western thing. Yeah. Because I would say that most Sikhs would say, no, I really just want to speak to that. That's what we do. That's what we do. Yeah. That's our, that's our qurbani. That's our.
We've always been in that position.
Yeah, we've always been in that position. And to think about the civil rights movement and to think about the continuation, this is, what this represents is just a continuation of those movements. Yep. This is a continuation of Sikhi that started, with Nanak and then Nanak and then the gurus and then how that became, and now even like our diaspora into America and how the next generation, such as your generation, is going to take Sikhi and really return it to the philosophy, which I think we have lost.
Which is the true philosophy of fighting for equality.
Exactly. Yeah. And fighting and then understanding that sometimes, justice is just, it's going to come, and you're going to have, like you said, patience, that trust and that faith that it will.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I totally agree with that. I think that like you everything you just said, yes. Yeah. Like, yeah. I want to expand on that, but I don't even think I can. I think it's just like you guys said it. Yeah. So yeah, I agree with that.
Well, me and Arno will bridge it to you guys. Yeah. Take over.
Yeah.
By the way, I'm a Buddhist, and my refuge name is Nejang Chosam, which means renunciation Dharma bridge. Yep. So you nailed it with the bridge.
Yeah. I want to. I know we've been going on for a while, and if we can go over another hour, but I guess we got to wrap this up. But I want to get a little bit into the book, and then just ask some random fun questions, and then we can wrap it. Do you guys want to add anything onto the book? I feel like we gave kind of a little bit of a preview of it. Yeah. Was there anything in particular about writing it, or?
It was a challenge. I had written a book previously that I self-published entirely. I did have work with some contract editors and with friends who edited for me that made it a better book. This book was another experience for me because working with Robin Gabby Fisher, who is our co-author, amazing writer. She's written 12, 13 books, New York Times bestseller, Pulitzer Prize winning journalist.
Oh, wow.
I had to give up a lot of control of writing in the process, and that was really difficult at times for me. But I think it's very important because the entire reason we brought Robin in was to kind of meld our two stories into one. Yeah. And I think the book does a great job of doing that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. The process was challenging. It was about a year and a half of writing.
Yeah.
About a year and a half.
I've had writing. I kind of brought writing that I've done over a decade ago into there, but kind of a year and a half of solid writing.
Yeah, just giving up ownership of like what's going to go into it, what's a good subject matter, and having somebody else's eyes be able to look at it and say, "Oh, that's going to And it really just speaks to that sense of we can come together and have one single voice.
Yeah, right. And I just think you guys hit the nail on that. Like taking your two life stories, creating a contrast, having that. I think it was very poetic the way the sharp I don't even know if poetic's the right word, but if the contrast was so sharp and so like it felt like I was watching a movie and you went from a serene scene and then immediately to something crazy.
Right.
And it's very difficult to accomplish that in the book. And I really think you guys did that. And I'm not saying that like BSing you because I read a lot of books and like I like a lot of books, but like it's hard for me to. There are very few books I can read 200 straight pages. Like Harry Potter is one. Of them. Right. Like
good company. To
yeah,
be
there's like that's like hard to like. It's hard to reach that level of good writing and storytelling. So like if you're on Harry Potter level pages, you did something right.
Well, I think one of the cool things is like now that Arno is he's a Buddhist.
Yeah.
He's very introspective now.
Yeah.
All right, and I think. I was reading this article this morning and it talked about how students, just growing up are not, they're taught skills, they're taught about everything else, but they're not taught about how to like be introspective.
Yep.
Right. And in a way, sitting at the Gurdwara all those hours for 2 hours while mom and dad sit there and you meditate, you have no choice but to be introspective. So you start to think about yourself.
Yep.
And you start, but I think that's one thing that we can bring to it now is that one single voice is really introspection on what we mean to other people and what other people mean to us.
Yep. I guess on to the random questions. What was it like to be on The View?
The View was awesome. Whoopi was amazing. We had some great conversation with her off camera. All the hosts on there were a lot of fun to talk to. The crowd was great. It was I've done a ton of media, so when I'm in the moment of those things, I'm in the moment, and I'm not thinking like 5 million people are going to see this. Like I'm just whatever. I'm here talking to some cool people, and we're gonna go on and talk about what we're going to talk about. But it was a lot of fun.
What's kind of crazy is that it seems so polished watching it on TV.
Yep.
But when you're like in it,
there's
all these like retakes and they're messing
really?
up. And, and I was like, Arno, isn't this show live?
Yeah.
And they're like, no, it's not really.
I didn't know that. I didn't know they edited it down.
Yeah, they edit. Well, they don't edit too much of it.
They do some live and they do some tape.
Oh.
So our show was on a tape day.
Oh, got it. I didn't know that. And then the last question: What is your best advice for a young person that does want to tackle hate?
I love Sikhi. I love the idea of being a learner. I can really relate to that. Today, that's just my passion, is to be constantly learning. So that in itself is huge. If you want to combat closed minds and closed hearts, keep yours open. Keep your mind open. Keep your heart open. Dig in on the positive things. I try to really challenge myself anytime I say something where I'm like, okay, I'm positive of this. I'm certain of this. Mm-hmm. Like, am I really that positive about it? Mm-hmm. So the things I want to be positive about are that compassion works, forgiveness works, kindness works. They're the most powerful, most beautiful weapons we have as human beings to make the world a better place. Yeah. So going back to Van's comment and a Nietzsche quote, actually, beware when fighting monsters, you don't become one. Right. So be about what you're for rather than what you're against.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think another thing that would be kind of throughout this book is this personal healing process. A lot of times people get into this kind of work because they're dealing with something with themselves. They're going through some pain, and they haven't quite healed yet. So I'm not saying that you have to be perfectly healed and you have to just be zen when you're doing this work. But you have to also be going through your own process while you're also helping community outside of you.
Yeah. Yep. Cool. You guys, that was a lot of fun.
That was awesome.
Buy the book.
You can order online. Giftofourwounds.com will connect you with all sorts of portals to do that, but it's also available in finer bookstores. Also, Par and I have kind of made the vehicle that we work with the world, our organization Serve to Unite, which is based on the Sikh principles of service and oneness. And people can learn more about that organization at serve2unite.org with the number 2. And also visit our Serve to Unite page on Facebook.
I've done both those things. I endorse it. Thank you.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening. Huge shout out to Pradeep and Arno for taking the time to chat with us. Buy a copy of their book, The Gift of Our Wounds, online or at your nearest retailer. If you like the show, please rate and review the podcast on iTunes, subscribe to Sikh Meets World on your favorite podcasting platform, and share it with your friends and family. Stay tuned for our next episode, which comes out next month, and of course, be sure to check out the National Sikh Campaign website for more information.